12-33284 USA versus
Julio Benjamin Sokop Bakyak.
Operation Streamline is part of what the Border Patrol calls their consequence delivery strategy.
Historically, things like unauthorized entry, right, crossing the border outside of a port of entry, have been treated administratively. People were just picked up and repatriated to Mexico. The idea of Streamline was to begin to criminally prosecute people for that act. And by criminally prosecuting them, you could add prison terms as a sort of additional punitive measure.
The purpose was to dissuade them from crossing the border and remaining in the United States, because in theory this was going to be such a shock that people wouldn't want to cross again.
So every day out here in the desert, by some criteria that no one knows and they're not willing to talk about, they pick out up to 70 people which they bring to court in shackles, hands and feet shackled, in a whole group. And in the morning, attorneys are assigned up to 5 defendants to defend. In a very brief period of time, usually about 30 minutes, these contract attorneys are supposed to explain the law to their clients, determine their clients' understanding of United States law and United States immigration law.
All of these 70 individuals are being charged with the crime of either entering the country illegally or re-entering the country illegally.
Part of what makes this thing so problematic is that the outcome is predetermined. Before people even show up at Operation Streamline hearings, it's basically assumed that they're guilty. They're told by their so-called defense attorney that that they need to plea, and the outcome is basically nobody fights their case.
You may be sent to prison for anywhere from 1 month to 6 months for simply crossing the border without papers.
People are just bewildered by it. It's a gut-wrenching thing. I don't know anybody that can go and see this and not come out of it really shaken.
It lacks proper due process because, number one, you're not given enough time with your attorney to be able to cooperate in your defense.
And when you're dragged into an en masse proceeding with 70 people in 1 hour, I've seen it again and again, and people just come away, and it's clear that they didn't understand what was going on.
And it allows constitutional rights that embody the identity of this country to be dismissed.
There's an equal protection issue. It becomes much easier to criminalize a group of people that you're then going to turn around and kick out of the country, and we don't have to deal with them, agitating for their rights. So it's essentially picking on perhaps the most vulnerable segment of society.
Operation Streamline has been the absolute incentive for CCA to establish an Arizona division and focus a lot of attention on imprisonment.
You have this huge demographic of people who are being funneled into the prison system.
You have corporations like Corrections Corporation of America, you have the GEO group, you have other groups that have taken on the governmental role of imprisonment and making it into a business. So they have a vested interest in immigration enforcement.
The private industry has found a way to turn tax money, public money, into private profits.
They're using that profit to go back and to lobby for laws like SB 1070 and like increased Streamline so that more people come into their detention centers.
Just here in Tucson, Arizona, 67 migrant workers were selected by the Border Patrol to go through Operation Streamline. the total cost just for their sentences, for their incarceration, that one day was $767,000.
It cost at least $17 million per month, plus another 22 minimum million per month to run the federal district court.
Private attorneys are getting paid anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000 for each defendant that they know that has no defense and there's no challenge in court.
Closing 10 or 11 schools in Tucson Unified School District and all the personnel, most of the personnel that goes with it, because they have a $17 million shortfall per year. These are per year operations that are vital to us as a community, and yet we pay CCA $17 million a month to incarcerate poor people. It's an outrage.
Operation Streamline is a glaring example of how the United States has now, for 30 years, criminalized the workforce that we have needed. It's been a kind of Darwinian system on the border.
What we have here is our creation, and then in the mid-1990s, not only did we begin to militarize the border, and we were wondering why, since NAFTA was touted as the solution to all migration, when we knew it would cause the opposite. And sure enough, the United Nations has now established that since the mid-90s, that 6 million workers in Mexico tied to agriculture have been left out of a job with NAFTA and have migrated unlawfully into the United States.
The longer you're locked up, the more you're not able to work, you're not making money, you're not paying it off, interest accumulates, and that means that sort of forces people to try crossing again. So it has the opposite effect of what is intended around a program like Streamline.
They've made outrageous statements about what it would take to break a person. What would it take you to break your habit of coming into the country if family's in here? I don't think 45 days will do it. I don't think 3 years will do it. I mean, it's really a wrong-headed analysis.
So it's pretty clear that if people want to have immigration reform, hand in hand with reform is going to go with enforcement and increased prosecutions at the border.
And the new Senate bill wants to triple this amount to have 210 people processed in this way. And you ask yourself, I mean, what are we doing? What are we doing?
Under the proposal, going to double the sort of sentencing guidelines for the statute, like the infraction of illegal entry, right? So instead of 6 months, it would be a year that most people would get.
If you look at the comprehensive immigration reform, all these individuals that have been both deported in the civil context or criminalized with a criminal case are all going to be ineligible.
It's clearly a fallacy that you need to have immigration enforcement in order to have immigration reform.
Rather than create more migration through our economic policies, our foreign policies, we should engage in policies that will promote livable wages and communities in those countries, rather than just one-sided good for Wall Street in America.
There's a real effort to build grassroots pressure against sort of the nuts and bolts of the program, the people that allow it to continue, as a strategy to ultimately end this program.
Part of a national effort that is very exciting, which is a call to end and repeal sections 1325 and 26, which are the illegal entry and re-entry.
Locally here, we're demanding of all of the members of the legal profession who are participating in Operation Streamline that they take one of the important steps, and that is refuse to participate any longer in this terrible process.
There's very simple responses in terms of what you can do. Writing letters to the editor, opinion pieces in local newspapers, I think is really important. The reality is that the majority of people don't know what Operation Streamline is.
I think if people are aware of the fact that there is such an investment by their government, whether it's their state government or federal government, in these types of prosecutions, I don't know that they would agree. I think a lot of people would be outraged.
We need to stop it, and we have a moral and ethical and I think legal and social responsibility to really put a halt to this.
The more that we educate people, I think more conscious decisions that we can make, and hopefully decide against policies, that will, be negative for our communities in the long run. While they may provide growth and jobs in the short run, how long can we create a commodity of human beings without feeling the repercussions?